Welcome to this public recording from the Aerospace and Defense Chromates Reauthorization Consortium, ADCR. This recording provides you with a comprehensive overview of the obligations set out in the authorization decisions for primers from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the so-called Defra, for the ADCR authorizations in Great Britain. My name is Anne Bierwisch from Phobic, and I will be your host for this recording. First, we will start with a list of ADCR uses for which final Defra decisions are available. Next, some background information on UK REACH is provided, and subsequently, the decisions will be presented in detail, starting with the conditions and obligations which are described in the paragraphs 4 to 6 of the Defra decisions in the new application for authorizations, and paragraphs 6 to 8 in the review reports. Afterwards, the monitoring arrangements are presented, and concluding with the recommendation made by Defra and the Health and Safety Executive, the HSE. Paragraph 9 or 11 of the Defra decisions is only relevant for authorization holders and thus not presented in this recording. Before we can start, I would like to remind you that this recording is provided by the ADCR service team. It does not in any way purport to speak on behalf of ADCR or any of its members, nor shall it modify or replace in any way ADCR's or any of ADCR's members' communications with their respective suppliers or any other parties. The information provided does not constitute legal advice. Neither ADCR nor any of its members shall be responsible or liable in any way for any omissions or misunderstandings or for the results obtained from the use of this information. The information is intended to be for general guidance and information purposes only, and is relied upon the user's own risk. No representations or warranties are made with regards to its completeness or accuracy. Neither ADCR nor its members accept any responsibility or liability for loss or damage of any nature whatsoever resulting from the use or reliance on the information. Please take note that compliance with the exposure scenarios, operational conditions, OCs, and risk management measures, RMMs, described in the Extended Safety Data Sheets, the ESDS, is a prerequisite. The authorization conditions described in the Defra decisions are a combination of environment, health, and safety risk prevention principles, as well as additional technical requirements that require a dedicated gap analysis by each company. The ADCR consortium submitted authorization dossiers in 2 phases to the UK Health and Safety Executive, the HSE. Tranche 1 covers the following soluble chromates: chromium trioxide, sodium dichromate, sodium chromate, potassium dichromate, and dichromium trischromate. A total of 8 review reports and 9 new applications for authorizations, AFAs, were submitted under this tranche. The Defra decisions were published in September 2024 or March 2025. The authorizations were granted for a period of 12 years and will cease to be valid in September 2036. As support material for these decisions, ADCR provided a guidance document, flowcharts, recordings, and held a webinar to inform downstream users of their obligations and how these can be implemented. On the ADCR website, under Guidance and Support, is the material available. Under Tranche 2, the primers, strontium chromate, potassium hydroxy-octa-oxodizincate dichromate, and pentazink chromate octahydroxide were submitted as 4 review reports and 3 applications for authorization. The Defra decisions for these 3 new applications for authorizations were published in January 2026. At the time of the recording of this presentation, the 4 review reports had not yet been published. Nevertheless, the Defra decisions were already shared with the applicants, and the ADCR consortium. Therefore, we know that the authorizations were granted for a period of 12 years and will cease to be valid in January 2038. This recording forms part of the support material that ADCR is providing to downstream users to keep them informed about the obligations under the Defra decisions and how to meet them. Further material includes guidance documents, exposure scenarios, the ES attached to the extended safety datasheets, the ESDS, and a monitoring template. The support material will be available on the ADCR website under Guidance and Support. Please see the provided link. This table shows the 4 uses of primers for which applications for authorizations were submitted by the ADCR consortium, their respective authorization numbers, the date of the decision, as well as the expiry date of the authorization and deadline for the review report. All users have been granted authorization for 12 years. Please note, in this recording, the obligations for the use formulation of primer products are not covered. Under UK REACH, chromates are classified as carcinogens and mutagens and are listed on the authorization list, also called Annex 14 of UK REACH. Substances that have been identified as substances of very high concern, for example carcinogens and mutagens, and are included in the authorization list cannot be used or placed on the market for use after a specified date, known as the sunset date, unless the use has been authorized or is exempted from authorization. Under a UK authorization, downstream users have to comply with the conditions of use as described in the application. The conditions are the ones which were reported to us by ADCR's downstream users and can be found in the Chemical Safety Report, the CSRs, and the conditions and obligations as stipulated in the Defra decisions. Most of these conditions will be summarized in the exposure scenarios attached to the safety data sheets provided with the substances, except, for example, the monitoring arrangements and submission of a written substitution update report. This slide explains the relationship between UK REACH and other legislations. In 2021, the EU REACH was brought into UK law, now known as UK REACH. Under the UK REACH authorization, no specific exposure limit has to be fulfilled, but the risk must be minimized to an appropriate and effective level. Therefore, authorization requires continuous efforts to reduce or replace the use of chromates. Adequate exposure control is achieved by combining engineering and process control measures with the use of personal protective equipment, the PPE. Under the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health regulations from 2002, the so-called COSH, legally binding workplace exposure limit, the WEL, are set to protect workers' health. For hexavalent chromium, a WEL of 0.01 milligrams per cubic meter shall not be exceeded. The WELs are published in the document code EH40/2005. Regarding environmental emissions, under EU REACH, sites were required to monitor and assess their environmental emissions to air and wastewater. UK environmental permits for your site may be applicable from national or local authorities, and these have to be fulfilled. To help participants who are less familiar with the subject matter follow, I would like to introduce a few key terms. An authorization holder is the applicant of the authorization mentioned on the title page of the decision. A downstream user is any company using the substance under this authorization. The conditions of use, COU, consisting of risk management measures, RMMs, for example the technical measures like local exhaust ventilation, and operational conditions, the OCs, for example the process temperature. A similar exposure group, SEG, is a group of workers performing similar tasks with a comparable exposure. The worker contributing scenario, the WCS, describes the tasks and activities carried out by workers and the COU in place. An exposure scenario, ES, is the summary of the contributing scenarios. The Extended Safety Data Sheet, the ESDS, is a SDS with an exposure scenario attached. The personal protective equipment, the PPE, are personal measures taken to control, for example, by wearing gloves or RPE. The respiratory protective equipment, the RPE, are personal measures taken to control the inhalation exposure, for example, by wearing a mask with a particle filter. The authorization decisions come with a set of conditions. For all granted ADCR primary uses, the imposed obligations and conditions are the same. Due to the joint approach taken by ADCR for the whole aerospace and defense sector, the same conditions apply, even if there is more than one authorization holder for a substance and use. The decisions can be found on Defra's website and the HSE opinions in the list of UK REACH authorization on HSE's website. Both links are provided here. The application reference, authorization number, authorization holder, and authorized use can be found on the title page of the Defra decision. There is always one decision for one use and one or more authorization holders. The authorization number is assigned to one authorization holder, one use, and one substance. Therefore, the authorization number indicates which authorization allows you to use the substance. An example of a Defra decision title page is shown here for a new application for authorization. Paragraph 3 of the authorization decision for new application for authorization and paragraph 5 for review reports states the period the authorization is granted for. All ADCR uses have been granted authorization for 12 years. Further, it is explained that if no review report is submitted before the 19th July 2036 for the new AFAs and before 22nd July 2036 for the review reports, the authorized use will cease to be valid on the 19th January 2038 for new AFAs or on 22nd January 2038 for the review reports. Before proceeding with the individual paragraphs of the Defra decisions, it is essential that downstream users understand and carefully review all requirements, assess any gaps, and address them accordingly. The subsequent slides will present the requirements specified in the respective paragraphs of the Defra decisions. Please note that the numbering of the specific paragraphs addressed in the Defra decisions differs slightly in the new applications for authorization and review reports. We start with paragraph 4 of the Defra decisions for the new applications for authorization, or paragraph 6 in the review reports, the conditions and obligations. This paragraph of the decision says that the authorization is subject to the conditions set out in the paragraphs 4 to 6 in the new applications for authorizations or paragraphs 6 to 8 for review reports, and also to ensure exposure to hexavalent chromium is reduced to as low a level as is technically and practically possible. Under the UK REACH authorization, there is no specific exposure limit for hexavalent chromium. Instead, downstream users are required to minimize the risk to an appropriate and effective level. Authorization requires continuous efforts to reduce or replace the use of chromates. This can be achieved by combining engineering and process control measures with personal protective equipment. It is recommended that you, as a downstream user, review, validate, and document your actions to assure compliance with this obligation. Paragraph 4a or 6a requires the downstream users must adhere to the operational conditions, OCs, and risk management measures, RMMs, described in the Chemical Safety Report, the CSR. The OCs and RMMs will also be included in the exposure scenarios attached to the extended safety data sheets. This is a site-specific action, as each site needs to review if the OCs and RMMs mentioned in the CSR are fulfilled, and if not, the necessary adjustments shall be made. Further, it is also mentioned that the conditions in the paragraphs 4b to 6 or 6b to 8 take precedence over the OCs and RMMs mentioned in the CSR. So these paragraphs given in the decisions have a higher priority and shall be dealt with first. We will come to these paragraphs in the next slides. Paragraph 4b or 6b addresses spraying outside an enclosed spray facility. It says that spraying of a primer paint containing STC, PCO, or PHD outside of an enclosed purpose-designed paint spray facility is not allowed by 19th August 2026 for the new applications for authorization or by 24th October 2026 for the review reports. Further, it highlights that specification for spray facilities are provided in the Annex 5 of the opinion by HSE. Please note that the Annex 6 of the HSE opinion contains additional information on the spray facilities rather than Annex 5. The HSE differentiates between two types of paint spray facilities: a walk-in fully enclosed purpose-designed paint spray facility and a purpose-designed paint spray booth. The fully enclosed spray facility is designed to accommodate larger components or whole aircrafts, with the paint sprayer having full mobility within the spray facility. There are two interconnected ventilation systems installed, one for the filtered air supply and one for air extraction. The extraction rate is typically 10% higher than the supply rate, thereby generating a negative static pressure. The purpose-designed paint spray booth is a spray booth or a bench-top design booth. The paint sprayer is positioned outside the front aperture, with its head positioned outside the aperture's plane. The spray direction should always be in the direction towards the extraction. Downstream users must validate if this obligation is already in place, and if not, take actions until latest 19th August 2026 for the new application for authorization or by 24th October 2026 for the review reports. The next paragraph 4c or 6c deals with the use of rotary sanders for machining activities. It states that the usage of rotary sanders to abrade surfaces primed with STC, PCO, or PHD is not allowed after the 19th August 2026 for the new applications for authorization or 24th October 2026 for the review reports, unless detailed exposure data are provided. This includes, among others, that the 19th percentile of operators' exposures to hexavalent chromium dust is below 5 micrograms per cubic meter, which is the agency's benchmark, during the activity and without taking RPE into account. Further, only qualified occupational hygienists who are listed on the UK register are allowed to perform the monitoring, which consists of at least 10 separate measurements from each similar exposure group, the SEGs, and are conducted according to BS ISO 16740/2005. For more details on the requested monitoring data, to continue using rotary senders for operating surfaces, see the Defra decisions and the ADCR guidance document. A register of occupational hygiene professionals of the British Occupational Hygiene Society can be found at their website. The downstream users are responsible for validating if rotary senders are used for this specific task at their site and if needed to order the conduction of monitoring campaigns. The use of powered sending tools is addressed in the next point of the decisions. In paragraph 4D or 6D, the application of STC, PCO or PhD to components that will be sended by using powered sending tools after the primer application is prohibited, unless the sending takes place in a designated booth or enclosure. There are 3 specific types of enclosures or booth named in the decisions. A full enclosure or booth under negative pressure, which is continuously monitored and sets off a visible and audible alarm if the pressure equals 0 or becomes positive. Or a purpose-designed bench-mounted backdraft dust extraction booth, consisting of 3 closed sides, one opening to the front where the operator stands with their breathing zone outside the booth. Or a walk-in downflow booth, providing a curtain of vertical laminar flow air which goes through 3-stage filtration, including a H14 HEPA filter, before the air is recirculated by a specific membrane filter in the ceiling. The recirculated air can be up to 90% and 10% consists of clean make-up air. The use of powered sending tools on primer-applied components is prohibited by 19 August 2026 for the new applications for authorization and by 24 October 2026 for the review reports. Onto extraction or a mobile extraction, including the vacuum cleaners, is no longer applicable and must be replaced by or combined with one of the 3 options. The downstream users are responsible for validating the sending of primer-based components, either confirming that it has already been performed in a designated booth or enclosure, or taking the necessary actions to ensure it is carried out correctly. On the next slide, examples of 3 types of booth are shown. On the left side, an example for a full enclosure or booth is shown. In the middle, a bench-mounted backdraft dust extraction booth is depicted, and the right-hand side shows a walk-in downflow booth. Paragraph 4E or 6E is regarding the use of media blasting outside a fully enclosed cabinet. Media blasting of any surface primed with STC, PCO or PhD shall not be performed outside any fully enclosed cabinet unless specific conditions are fulfilled. These include that the whole craft or component is located entirely in a full enclosure or booth under negative static pressure, and the negative static pressure has to be monitored continuously. And a visible or audible alarm is activated if the pressure is 0 or becomes positive. The high static pressure can indicate an issue with blocked filters and reduced efficiency. Ensure that the alarm system is triggered outside the specified range. The downstream users must validate if this obligation is already in place, and if not, take actions until latest 19 August 2026 for the new applications for authorization or by 24 October 2026 for the review reports. The use of compressed air-operated air gun is addressed in paragraph 4F or 6F. The use of compressed air-operated air guns is prohibited for the purpose of blowing chromate dust in the aftermath of any painting, sanding, or blasting activity. Once more, downstream users are required to verify whether this obligation has already been established. If not, the necessary actions must be taken by 19th August 2026 for the new applications for authorizations or by 24th October 2026 for the review reports. For removing chromate dust, paragraph 4G or 6G specifies that vacuum cleaners shall not be used after 19th August 2026 for new AFAs or 24th October 2026 for review reports, unless they are certified meeting Type H specification fitted with a HEPA filter. Please ensure that the industrial vacuum cleaners used at the site has this certification. If this is not the case, please take the necessary steps, for example, get in contact with a service provider. For further information and recommendations on selecting a suitable vacuum cleaner, please refer to the HSE opinions in section 10. In the Defra decision, paragraph 4H or 6H specifies when a breathing apparatus in demand mode needs to be worn. It is required that operators carrying out spray painting of STC, PCO, or PhD-based primer inside a paint spray booth or facility, or performing media blasting outside of a fully contained blasting cabinet must wear a breathing apparatus in demand mode. In the practical guide Respiratory Protective Equipment at Work, HSE provides an example of what is considered to be a breathing apparatus in demand mode. It contains a full-face mask with demand valve, a positive pressure demand airline or positive pressure self-contained demand, a compressed air cylinder. Further equipment such as a pressure gauge or body harness may be needed. For tasks involving spraying inside a spray booth or facility and media blasting outside a blasting cabinet, a breathing apparatus in demand mode will be mandatory from 19th August 2026 for new AFAs or 24th October 2026 for review reports onwards. Downstream users are advised to check if this applies to their site. In addition to the use of breathing apparatus in demand mode, the decisions under paragraph 4E or 6E also request that the supply of breathable quality air is available and tested frequently. The HSE's practical guide classifies that the supplied air must meet the quality requirement of British Standard BSEN 12021. In accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines, the maintenance, examination, and testing of compressors should be carried out. It is recommended that testing is carried out at least every 3 months and that appropriate records are kept for a period of 5 years. If breathable quality air is not yet provided, downstream users are requested to implement a supply of breathable quality air by 19th August 2026 for the new applications for authorization and by 24th October 2026 for the review reports. The use of fettling tools is addressed in the paragraph 4J or 6J of the decisions. The decisions prohibit the use of fettling tools on surfaces primed with STC, PCO, or PhD with an abrasive disc in excess of 75 mm. If abrasive discs with such a diameter of 75 mm shall be used at the site, downstream users must comply to the following obligations. The 19th percentile of the operator's hexavalent chromium exposure for the duration of the fettling activity is below 5 microgram per cubic meter. That is the agency's benchmark, and demonstrated by reliable and representative task-based air monitoring data. And suitable RPE must be used during all fettling activities, unless exposure is below 5 microgram per cubic meter demonstrated by air monitoring data. The use of abrasive disc with an excess or at a 75 mm diameter are only allowed under specific conditions, whereas abrasive disc with smaller diameters, for example 50 mm, may be used. Regarding further information on monitoring requirements, please refer to the Defra decisions and the ADCR guidance document. Downstream users are required to validate whether this obligation has already been established. If not, the necessary actions must be taken by 19 August 2026 for the new applications for authorization or by 24 October 2026 for the review reports. The decisions in paragraph 5 or 7 require from the authorization holders that they regularly engage with the downstream users. It specifies that the authorization holders must engage with the downstream users on a regular basis to check whether the OCs and RMMs remain in place. Therefore, Defra instructs the authorization holders to issue a questionnaire or by other means at 3 intervals. These are defined by the decisions at 19 January 2029, 19 January 2032, and 19 January 2035 for the new ARFAs, or 24th March 2029, 24th March 2032, and 20th March 2035 for the review reports. The gathered information has to be shared with the agency upon request. You, as a downstream user, do not have to be active upfront. However, upon request, downstream users must provide the requested information to the authorization holders. Similar to the paragraph 5 or 7 of the decisions, the paragraph 6 or 8 require from the authorization holders to submit a written substitution update report to the agency by 19 January 2032 for the new ARFAs or by 24th March 2032 for the review reports. These reports shall include details on the undertaken substitution efforts and updates on the progress made by the downstream users. Therefore, the authorization holders will contact downstream users to provide input on this subject. So, upon request, downstream users must provide the requested information to the authorization holders. Monitoring arrangements for measuring the exposure of STC, PCO, and PhD to workers is addressed in the paragraph 7 or 9 of the decisions. Further information regarding the requested monitoring measurements can be found in paragraph 7a or 9a. Defra requests that a minimum of 10 personal inhalation exposure monitoring measurements is taken every 12 months during the review period for each job role that covers the relevant worker contributing scenarios, the WCS. The WCS can be found in the CSR and include, among others, sprayers in a hangar, sprayers in a booth, senders, and machinists. The air sampling must be undertaken by a competent person as per BS-EN 689 and BS ISO 16740/2005. Defra regards an occupational hygienist registered under the Register of Occupational Hygiene Professionals of the British Occupational Hygiene Society as qualified. A link to the website of the British Occupational Hygiene Society is provided here. The British Standard ISO 16740/2005 provides a method for determining the time-weighted average mass concentration of hexavalent chromium in workplace air. It applies to personal sampling of the inhalable fraction of airborne particles as defined in ISO 7708 and to static sampling. The analytical method can be used to determine masses of 0.01 to 10 micrograms of hexavalent chromium per sample without dilution. Further, paragraph 7a or 9a Request regular air sampling survey for the activities of sanding, rubbing down, fettling, and media blasting outside of any full enclosed blasting cabinet. For the sanding and fettling activities, it is specified that where relevant, each activity has to be treated as a separate SEG. For example, due to performing in different places, like enclosed booth or large work area. And thus measurements shall be performed and the 19th percentile should be determined for each of these SEGs. As a consequence, downstream users must perform occupational monitoring in sufficient numbers for the relevant activities or tasks and select a competent service provider to conduct the monitoring. Paragraph 7b or 9b of the decisions provides more details on the measurements. These must be performed according to the methodology specified in BS ISO 16740/2005. The sampler must be placed within 30 centimeters of the worker's breathing zone and outside of the RPE. The measurement should be representative of the range of tasks with possible hexavalent chromium exposure and of the total numbers of workers potentially exposed. Adequate contextual information shall be provided for each sampling event as detailed within BS EN 689. The information may include details such as the substance used, the task performed, and the duration. The downstream user must perform the occupational monitoring measurements as advised. How to use the gathered information from the measurements is specified in paragraphs 7c and 9c. Downstream users have to use the information from the measurements to regularly review the effectiveness of the OCs and RMMs. If any personal exposure data is above the agency's benchmark of 5 microgram per cubic meter, then prompt action must be taken to reduce the worker's exposure. The RMMs used must be appropriate and effective to limit the exposure risk to hexavalent chromium. Paragraph 7d or 9d of the decision specifies what actions shall be taken where RMMs have been modified to reduce exposure. Then downstream users are requested to perform a personal monitoring survey at least every 3 months until a minimum of 10 personal exposure data points is obtained. Again, the methodology given in BS ISO 16740/2005 shall be used. The gathered data is used to determine a new 19th percentile. In case the personal exposures are still above the agency's benchmark, then again prompt action must be taken by the downstream users. The next paragraph in the decisions informs that upon request, the downstream users must provide the results of the measurements to the authorization holders or the agency. The monitoring arrangements for exposure of STC, PCO, and PhD to humans via the environment is addressed in paragraph 8 or 10 of the decisions. Paragraph 8a or 10a specifies that downstream users are requested to take measurements of the concentrations of total chromium and hexavalent chromium released to air and wastewater for each site. The frequency of sampling shall be according to the environmental permit and be representative of normal OCs and prolonged increases in operation. Also, sufficient measurements at sufficient frequency should be taken to demonstrate that the data is robust and representative. Paragraph 8b or 10b of the decisions clarify that the samples shall be taken from the stack for monitoring the air and the final discharge point to the foul sewer for the wastewater. Downstream users must perform the monitoring to humans via the environment as advised. The following paragraph 8c or 10c in the decisions provides further specifications on the measurements the downstream users must comply to. An accredited laboratory according to the Environment Agency's monitoring certification scheme for environmental permit holders must be used for the analysis of total chromium and hexavalent chromium. Paragraph 8D or 10D asks the downstream users to check their measurements against any emission limit values given in the permit and the most up-to-date, best available techniques standards. Also, downstream users must use the monitoring data to improve or maintain the effectiveness of the OCs and RMMs as stated in paragraph 8E or 10E. The next paragraph 8F or 10F in the decision states that upon request, the downstream users must provide the results of the measurements to the authorization holders or the agency. Paragraph 10 or 12 of the decisions refers to the HSE opinions, section 10, and the recommendations made within the sections, which are recommendations for submitting a review report. Therefore, the following points are no obligations but recommendations to the downstream users. In section 10, the HSE recommends continuing biological monitoring for workers. Further, the HSE provides guidance on the selection of a suitable vacuum cleaner. Regarding the assessment of the humans via the environment, HSE is in favor of long-term environmental monitoring datasets, as these will benefit in assessing the effectiveness of the RMMs. Regarding the waste handling, HSE recommends recording the chromium concentration and volume of waste leaving each site, as well as estimating the amount of chromium being generated as waste at each site. For further details, please refer to the HSE opinions. An ADCR Q&A webinar will be held on the 11th June at 2 o'clock UK time, where you can ask questions. Please see the ADCR website for details on how to join the Q&A webinar. I hope you found this presentation useful and wish you a good day.